let's find that. Okay, here we go. Parts of government. There's a lot going on in that chapter. I don't expect you to know this stuff in excruciating detail. On the other hand, I expect you to be able to understand the difference between different kinds of legislatures and what we expect different parts of government to do. So this is not really that complicated. So anyway, there are two types of legislatures, and we should understand the difference between them. There are democratic legislatures and there are consultative legislatures, and I will explain the difference. And of course, as always, it's in the reading. So democratic legislatures are elected, first of all, right? People voted to put these folks in office. Consultative legislatures can be elected or they can be appointed, and we see some of both in some states. The big difference is that democratic legislatures can make policy, right? They can vote, they can pass laws. Consultative legislatures are largely window dressing. You know, they're there, they don't really have any power. So if you were paying any attention to the sad news that Russia has at long last invaded Ukraine, if you saw the other day the upper house of the Russian parliament, the Duma, voted to support this decision. Although apparently the great majority of people in Russia do not want to go to war, which is largely true of people all over the world. But anyway, so they're there to make what government does look more legitimate. They're not there to actually be a check on the power of anybody. They're not there to make law on their own. It's just window dressing. So now here's where people tend to mess up on questions about this. There are congressional style legislatures, and those are governments that feature a division of power between different branches. And there are parliamentary style legislatures, which don't really have different branches of government. Certainly there's no separation between the executive and the legislative functions. They're all in parliament. Those are both democratic legislatures. Let me say that again, and for the love of God, write this down, because I'm tired of seeing people get this question wrong. They're both democratic legislatures, okay? Canada has a parliament. They have a prime minister. They're all elected, right? They're all elected and they vote to make law. So really, it's no different in that regard from the US Congress. Right? Those are both democratic legislatures. So I hope that that makes sense. If it doesn't, say something. But anyway, as I said, parliamentary legislatures don't generally involve a division of power. They serve both executive and legislative functions. So in Canada, the prime minister, who's the head of state, Justin Trudeau, he is also a member of parliament. So he is the leader of the majority party in parliament. And that's how that works. So same thing in Great Britain. Same thing in a lot of countries. Mexico, on the other hand, has a congressional style government. It's very much like ours. They have a president, similar powers to our president. They have a Congress. Congress could be divided into different institutions, but it doesn't have to be. So, for example, there's the House of Commons in Canada, and that's really where the power is. Canada also has a Senate. Those people are all appointed. It's a holdover from when, and they still do in Great Britain, they have the House of Lords. Well, they can't make law. They can debate things, they can slow things down a little bit, but they don't make law. It's an anachronism, right? It's something that's still there. It doesn't need to be there. They don't really need the House of Lords in Great Britain, but it's a tradition. So anyway, so you don't have to have a House and Senate. Okay, the state of Nebraska has a unicameral legislature. They have a House of Representatives. They don't have a Senate, but it's still a democratic legislature. So I've said this before, and I hope this is beginning to make sense. you can't confuse American government with all the other governments in the world. There's all different kinds of ways to organize them. So you can't just assume that every congressional style government has a House and a Senate. Okay. It may not, it may. It doesn't really matter. I mean, it matters if you're looking at that particular country, but the point is to understand these are all democratic legislatures and they all perform roughly the same functions. Now, as we said, the consultative legislatures are, it's new paint on an old car. It doesn't really change anything. They typically don't have much power. China has the People's Congress. It's the largest legislature on earth. It's got like 3,000 members. They meet once a year for a week and they talk a lot. They don't do anything. They're not going to stand up and say, Xi Jinping, president of China, you're just wrong. This is not happening. So anyway, we should understand that much. That's not a democratic legislature. So this is what democratic legislatures do. They have a certain number of functions, and these tend to be the same in most governments. They make law. That includes the budget, right? They pass bills, they debate things, they amend old bills. That's a big job. Legislatures tend to be, whatever kind it is, if it's a democratic legislature, they're kind of in charge of making policy. They tend to have the final say on laws. So they represent constituents to the government, right? So you have a legislator of some kind, you can go to that person or their office, as it were, and say, I need help with this. And people express their concerns to legislators, and perhaps that will result in law. Perhaps something will come of this. So that's a big job, right? So they connect citizens to the government. But they have to balance the needs of the area they represent with the needs of the nation as a whole. Right? So there's the things that the people at home want, and of course you're very interested in that if you're a legislator. But there's also sort of the bigger picture for the country. I give you an example. We have, as with many countries in the world, we have farm subsidies, which is to say, in one way or another, we pay money to farmers to keep them in business because we want to be able to feed ourselves, and it's not always a very economic business. Some people, I have read in the past, people say, we should just let the farms die. We can buy food overseas. Well, how do you think that would have worked in the time of the pandemic when shipping stopped and nothing was going anywhere? Not being able to feed yourself is like suicide. So that has to happen. And policymakers should sort of wake up to that fact. That's never going to change. But in this country, some of the farmers we subsidize are tobacco farmers. Why? Because legislators, members of Congress from tobacco growing states push for farm subsidies for tobacco farmers. Why are we subsidizing a product that actually kills people? I don't know, but we still do. That's politics, right? So, if those folks, here's the thing, if they don't vote for those subsidies, they will get unelected because somebody else will come along and say, by God, we've got to help these farmers. I think we should pay those farmers to do something else. It would be cheaper in the long run, but so be it. Forgive me if you're a smoker. Too bad. They engage in administrative oversight. And what that means is they look at the operating arm of government and see if the laws that they passed are working. And there's a lot of give and take there. So legislatures tend to be divided up into committees, and there's different ways that they do that. And the committees allow specialization. And so you will have agency officials, the committee has a hearing, agency officials show up and they say, this is working, this is not working, here's what we need. And so their job in part is to say, is this happening the way it's supposed to happen? In a congressional legislature, they may check the power of other branches of government. So that's true in the United States, okay? Sort of true in Mexico. In Canada, there really aren't other branches of government. I mean, there's a court system, but it's not like they're blocking actions by Justin Trudeau. He's just a part of the legislature. So I hope that makes sense. So let's see here. Executive. So all states have some kind of executive. So Could be a prime minister, it could be a president. Now, this can get a little bit confusing. So Germany has a legislature. They have two. They have the equivalent of a House and Senate, the Bundestag, and the other one whose name escapes me, right? And the head of government is called the chancellor. And so that person's like a prime minister, right? They're a member of the Bundestag, and they're also the top official in government. Well, they also have a president, but that is a ceremonial post. The person who is president doesn't really have anything to do. They represent the country at various things, but they're not actively involved in the running of the state. Canada has the governor general, who is appointed by the Queen, usually on the recommendation of the prime minister, and they have some formal functions, but they're not actively involved in the running of the government. So you have to sort of look at the government and say, okay, if there's a president, is this person really running the show, or is it somebody else? France is a semi-presidential republic. So there's a president and there's a prime minister, and they both actually have a role to play because, that's France. As Charles de Gaulle is supposed to have said, it's impossible to govern a country with 400 kinds of cheese. I don't know if that's true. They're a fairly successful state. So anyway, executives are expected to lead. And if you think about it, probably before you came to this class, if you thought about government, you thought about the president, and that's who you blamed for everything. That's what a lot of people do. And students are always surprised to find out, oh, nope, there's nobody there who could just sort of snap their fingers and say, this is what's going to happen. You can do that if you're Vladimir Putin, but everybody else doesn't get to do that. Donald Trump wanted to do that, and fortunately, he didn't get to do that. Donald Trump said the other day, as Putin was preparing to invade Ukraine, that he's a genius. So he likes war and he likes Putin. Be that as it may. They oversee the implementation of the law. So if the legislature, whatever it may be, passes a law, the executive is expected to sort of put that into practice. They may be a check on the power of the other branches if there are branches. If there's not, they aren't. Prime Minister, remember, is head of the majority party in Parliament, so they are both an executive and a legislator. This, I think, is true. I had a mayor in one of my NET classes this week, and I asked her this question, and she said, yes, successful executives often have a vision for what they want the state to be. And that means that that gives them an agenda, and then they can try to make that agenda happen. And countries, states, cities, anything tends to do better when somebody at the top. Now they have to persuade the legislature, right? If you have a strong mayor form of government, then the mayor has to persuade the city council, the governor has to persuade the state legislature, the president has to persuade Congress, the prime minister has to persuade Parliament. So executives have the power to persuade, they don't always have the power to command. So, and there's always a struggle there, right? In the United States, we have the War Powers Act, which says that, the president has to get Congress's approval to do something. We've been in lots of wars, and hardly any of them have actually been declared by Congress. And part of the reason for that is that when it comes to foreign policy, president is one person, and they can make a decision. Congress, if you will recall, is designed to not make decisions in a hurry, and that's often what foreign policy has. Now, I don't think he's going to do this, but if President Biden sent troops into Ukraine, Congress's only recourse would be to cut off funding. And they wouldn't do that because that would leave American men and women without food and supplies and whatnot in the middle of a war. That would be stupid, S-T-O-O-P-I-D, stupid. So in our country, at least, the president kind of holds the hammer on what happens with the military and what happens with foreign policy. The Senate in our country is supposed to approve treaties, but Presidents can do executive orders. They don't have the force of a treaty, but they work. So that happens quite a bit. Barack Obama, one of his many mistakes was to not issue executive orders sooner. I mean, he had a Congress that said, we're not going to work with him. We're going to make sure he's a one-term president. We're going to block everything he does. And he still tried to play ball with them for 6 years before he finally sort of woke up and realized, well, that ain't happening. So Barack Obama was an outstanding human being, but frankly, sort of an average president. And to me, he spoke to the need for experience. He didn't have that much experience. If, when you had Mitch McConnell saying, we're going to stop you, it's like, okay, they're not going to play ball with you. You need to sort of move ahead, move on. But anyway, there's that. Courts. So part of every government is courts. And here again, we have a difference between democratic states and between authoritarian states. So in democratic states, courts compel citizens and governments to adhere to the law as written. Right? So if Congress passes a law, if Parliament passes a law, and then somebody does something that contradicts that law, then somebody can file suit and the court can say, no, this is what the law says, you can't do that. We call that, in part, the power of judicial review. And the power of judicial review says that courts can invalidate acts of government as unconstitutional. So that's especially true in our country, true in many others. Some countries have a separate constitutional court for those kinds of decisions. We don't. All the courts have that ability. Here's the key. Somebody has to file suit, right? Congress could pass the worst law on earth and the president could sign it. And if nobody complains about it, it stays. Because the courts by themselves can't decide to overturn the law. Somebody has to file suit. And that's the key to the power of judicial review. Judges come from all over. They may be elected. They may be appointed. In the United States, every state has a slightly different system. We elect judges in Washington state. In a few states, the governor appoints them. In other states, there may be a judicial commission. And they may be appointed for life, like federal judges, which is to insulate them from politics. It keeps good judges and bad judges there for quite a long time. So that has, mixed blessings. Judges are supposed to decide cases based on the information provided to them. So one thing we insist on in this country, and it clearly isn't always true, is that a judge is not supposed to go around talking about politics and what they think. Because they're not, and when judges in this state run for office, they're generally not allowed to say, I'm for abortion. I'm against abortion. I mean, whatever the issue is, right? Because they're supposed to decide the cases it's presented to them, not on what they think ahead of time. So sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. I mean, one thing you should get from this class is that government is not all bad and it's not perfect. So it's a balancing act. Judges, when they rule on a case, will write a decision, and this becomes known as case law. And case law is something that other judges will refer to, decisions made in other courts. And in those, that leads some people to complain that judges are making law, but that usually seems, I hear those complaints when somebody isn't happy with the decision. If they're happy with the decision, nobody ever says that. So that happens. In non-democratic states, in authoritarian or totalitarian states, right? Once again, the courts are just there to make things look legitimate, and two, they tend to be an active arm of the state, which is to say whatever policy that the state wants, the people who run the state, well, the courts are going to enforce that. So you don't get fair trials under those circumstances. The courts aren't going to say no to the government. Oh, that's unconstitutional. That just doesn't happen. So in non-democratic states, it's just another part of the government. So now subnational governments. So this is like states and provinces, counties, cities, whatever. And they're there, and most countries have these except for very small countries. They're there to provide local services to citizens. So the bigger the country, the more important this is. So you have a city council, and the city council, like in your own cities, all right? Most of you probably live in a city. Well, here's what cities do. They are 4P: police, parks, planning, and potholes. Now they all do some different things. You know, Auburn and Renton have airports, and some cities have golf courses, and some cities have other utilities, but they all do parks, right? Local parks. They do police, right? That's tends to be a very local function. Planning, who can build what where. You want to add something to your house, you're going to need a permit. You're going to have apartments in this neighborhood or just single family homes. And included in that is trying to do some economic development. Cities, local governments, all, you know, they want good jobs, they want strong tax revenue, because then they can pay for all the services that people say they want. You know, this is what I see in here. This is how I know somebody really is an American. They complain about taxes and they want all the services government can provide. So you want it all and you want it for free. This is not logical or rational, but so it goes. It's America, right? And then finally, potholes. They take care of local roads. So, for example, that's what a local government does. In many states in the United States, we have special purpose districts. So we have school districts. Those are independent local governments. They have elected board of commissioners, board of directors. The directors hire and fire the superintendent, and they make policy. So they deliver schools. They're all under the state, but you know, locally they can make some decisions on what they want to do. If you live in Federal Way, you or your family pays Lake Haven Water and Sewer District. That's an independent local government. They provide water and sewer services. What they charge people who live and work there is how they pay the bills. So that's what they're there for. If it is a federal system like ours, like Canada, like Mexico, then the local governments, particularly states and provinces, have a little bit of independence, right? They have more ability to set policy on their own. As I'm sure I said earlier, 88% of the world's governments are unitary, which means that the national government has all the power and it lends power to the local governments. So they can't really set policy on them. And like they may be called states, they may be called provinces. Now, once again, in authoritarian governments, there are local governments, you know, divisions of government, and they're just there to implement the policy of the national government. So China has all these republics and semi-autonomous regions and whatnot. None of them are, right? They're just pieces of the puzzle, and they don't say no to Beijing. Russia still has, you know, a bunch of republics, and you know, they're not for real, right? They're just agencies of the national government. So once again, in authoritarian states, there's just no division of power. Now, the last thing in the chapter, and this is something we should understand something out. It's one of those unfortunate words that people have turned into a dirty word when in fact it's not really bureaucracy. It's just a form of organization. I would predict that wherever you work, for example, it's organized bureaucratically. So it's very common. It's common in government, it's common in business, and it has certain features. So there's a division of labor, which means that people have distinct tasks that they're supposed to do. Think about where you work. Does everybody do everything? If the answer is no, then that's a bureaucratic form of organization. There's a hierarchy of command. Somebody's in charge, somebody's underneath them. People have to sort of follow orders. So it's a defined chain of command. We know who's in charge and we know what everybody's duties are. Adherence to established rules. Now, why this is important is that if government was making different decisions for different people, who presented similar cases, that wouldn't be good. Then we're playing favorites, and playing favorites tends to lead to not good government. And of course, when it comes to race and things like that in our country historically, particularly in the South, people played favorites, right? So I'm going to give you this building permit because you're my buddy, but you, no, you don't get it. I don't know you. That's not good government. So it doesn't mean that the people who work in government can't make different decisions. They can, but they have to have a reason, right? They just can't do it based on who they like and who they don't like. They can look at particular cases and say, yeah, you can do that, or no, you can't. So it's not totally inflexible, but it does make it sort of predictable, right? It provides some stability. If we have a certain set of rules and everybody knows what they are and we all agree to go along with them, things tend to work better by and large. So even though you may hear bureaucracy as this evil thing, right? It makes government so big and inefficient. It's really just a form of organization. And before we had bureaucracy, government was not terribly efficient. People in government played favorites. They said, yeah, you get a permit and you don't. And you have to pay extra money, and you get to vote and you don't. So that's what that's about. So anyway, there's a quick rundown of the chapter. And really, there's just a few things here that you have to be able to explain. So does anyone have any questions? I will be happy to try to answer them. You can raise a hand or you can put it in the chat field. That would be fine too. Whatever works for you. And hey, we're almost done. We're on the downhill side. What do we got? 3-4 weeks left. We're all in grave danger of passing. This is a good thing. Can you ask? Yes, yes, Natalie, you can ask about the previous exam. Go right ahead there.
So it said that for question 4, most of the people who vote are senior citizens, and the chapter said that like it's mostly older people who vote because they tend to care more about
Chapter does
and,
not say that. What the chapter says is senior citizens are more likely to vote. It does not say most of the people who vote are senior citizens. That's not a trick question. That's a question that asks you to stop and think about what it just said. Lots of people get that wrong because they're just not focused. And I think as annoying as that may be, I mean, I had some questions like that way back in college, and you know what? I paid better attention after that. And one of my goals is for you all to be better students, because that will help you down the road. So really, if we look at that, just the numbers, right? Who do you think there's more of, people 18 to 30 or people over 65? I mean, do the math there, right? So people over 65 are only about a quarter of the electorate. This is the United States, but I expect it's true in most countries, right? I mean, think of it this way. I'm almost 65 and y'all are going to live much longer than me. So clearly I'm not likely to be the majority of voters. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
Good. Good. I'm glad you asked that, because that one always comes up.
How about question 12?
Remind me which one that is.
Types of political parties include.
Well, it says pretty clearly in the reading that the types of political parties include mass parties and cadre parties. There's two different types of parties. Mass parties include all different kinds of voters, so that would be like the Republicans and Democrats, right? Cadre parties include people committed to a particular ideology, so that would be libertarians or communists or socialists. And if we look at multi-party democracies, you're more likely to see those kinds of parties. And that gets at the essay question, the difference between U.S. and parties in other countries. One of them is that with a two-party system, and we have a two-party system because of the nature of our elections. Some people will say, and I read this a lot in the answers, oh, because it's easier to do it that. It's nothing to do with whether it's easier. If you have winner-take-all elections, there's no payoff to voting for a third party. Right? So candidates gravitate to the two main parties so they can get elected. And that's where voters cast their ballots, because most people want to vote for somebody who they think has a chance of winning. So if you have a multi-party system, and you only have those where there's some kind of proportional representation. So if we look at Germany, okay, they have partially proportional representation. So when the Greens, they have a Green Party, right? It's an environmental party. When the Greens got 5% of the vote, they got 5% of the seats in the Bundestag. Under those circumstances, there's a payoff to you to vote for a third party. So that's a big difference. As many of you noted, the other big difference is that we don't have a traditional Labor Party, and that's a good part of the answer. But it's also important to know why we have what we do. And people say, well, we need a third party. I hear this all the time. Well, unless we change the nature of our elections, we're not going to get one. We've had some successful third party movements. But what happens most of the time is that if they have good ideas, the other parties will steal them and they get folded into the two main parties. The only successful third party in our country's history were the Republicans. They didn't show up till the 1850s. They were an avowedly anti-slavery party. And as that issue came to the fore, they got votes. They elected people to Congress. They elected presidents. And they replaced what was called the Whig Party. And the Whig Party broke up over slavery because Northern Whigs were against it and Southern Whigs were for it. Well, Northern Whigs became Republicans and Southern Whigs became Democrats because the Democrats sided with the South in the Civil War. So other than that, we had a progressive movement in the late 19th and early 20th century, and they had some interesting ideas. Well, some progressives ended up becoming Republicans and some progressives ended up becoming Democrats. So, does that answer your question, Natalie? Probably then some and more.
Yeah, then and some more, definitely.
Okay, good. What else? What else can I tell you folks? You're all doing fine. Just keep turning stuff in. You're going to do just fine. And there's enough extra credit there that, you answer a question wrong, that's not going to sink your grade. The people who don't do well in this class just don't turn stuff in. And the people who turn stuff in do just fine. And the people who read and think a little bit more, you're all quite capable of this, tend to do really well. But by and large, I find I got to push you all a little bit or you'll coast. It doesn't make you bad people. We all do that. I did that. I really didn't get serious about college, until I got married and had a child and realized I got to make a living. I better take this seriously. So I'm not suggesting that to any of you anytime soon. Yes, Theo.
Yes. Can I ask a question outside of the course?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I will start by saying my major, I want to transfer in political science.
Yes.
And then I would like you send a message about if anybody wants an advisor. I definitely need that.
Yeah, we can do that. Why don't you message me and we'll set up an appointment.
Oh yes, I will do that.
Yeah, that'd be good.
My question is, what the U.S. the current administration could do different to stop the Russian invasion in Ukraine?
Yeah, that's a $1 billion question, isn't it? I was reading about this today because I thought someone will ask a question about this, and Putin's a bully, right? He the only rational thing there is that he's worried about his western border with Europe, and since most of Europe has now joined NATO, he appears to have some fear that we're all going to go batshit crazy and invade Russia, which is like really extremely unlikely. On the other hand, dictators, and he's basically a dictator, they go to war to distract their populace from what's going wrong in their country otherwise. So there's that going on, and he sort of wants to push the West and see how far he can go. Here's the challenge: we can do sanctions, and sanctions only work if they hurt the people on top. If the sanctions just hurt the ordinary people in Russia, it won't help. All right, because they really lack a mechanism at this point to get rid of Putin. I mean, that only works in democratic states, and quite frankly, democratic states are much less likely to go to war, ourselves notwithstanding. So targeted sanctions that sort of affect the ruling class of Russia are probably the best we can hope for at the moment. Putin said that, you know, if anyone sends troops to Ukraine, he will unleash all kinds of holy hell on the rest of the world, which is obviously intended to make us think he's going to push the button and fire off the nukes. I don't really know. From what I understand about Putin is that he will not step down from power, because if he does, he's likely to get killed. There's a lot of people who really don't like him, even in Russia. So sending troops would be difficult, not just because of that risk. Americans would be really divided about that, understandably so. You know, we start losing American men and women in a war halfway around the world. I think we've had our fill of that at the moment. We were in Afghanistan for 20 years and Iraq for almost as long, you know, wars that quite frankly didn't need to happen. Particularly the second Iraq war. You know, we went into that war because George W. Bush let himself be convinced that the Iraqis were behind 9/11 and had weapons of mass destruction, neither of which was true. I mean, we had that guy in a bottle, and you know, we just messed up that whole situation. So anyway, I don't know that our country is mentally and emotionally prepared to go to war. So Biden's options are a little bit limited, but if he can get other countries to participate in the sanctions, he may have some ability. China, you know, who always wants to stick it to us too at present, frankly, is helping out Russia by agreeing to buy Russian grain and lessen the impacts of the sanction. Now, they're one of the other big economies in the world, so that complicates our ability to stop them. Making it clear that if Russia moves beyond Ukraine, there will be actual physical consequences. That would be something that I would want to make clear. But of course, if you say that, then you sort of are playing the chip, saying, "But we won't go into Ukraine." You know, you sort of want to make your opponent think, "Yeah, they're batshit crazy too. Maybe they'll do something." So it's a sad and unfortunate situation. War does not make anything better. I mean, you know that. You will hear people say, "Oh, the whole economy is built on war." No, it isn't. That's just ridiculous. It's, you know, and economies don't do better during war. Defense contractors do better during war, but the rest of the economy doesn't. So, you know, the only consolation I have is that Trump is not president, because he would have been leading the cheers for Putin. So there's that. You may have liked President Trump. You're on your own there. So other questions. Thank you, Theo.
Thank you. I will message you to make an appointment.
Please do that.
Yeah.
Let's do that. That's good.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else? Anything else I can help you with? like I said, we're near the end. Just keep going. Do your best. Try to get the reading done. Try to take notes when you read. I'm always hopeful of getting everyone to develop that habit. That just helps so much. I wish I had known that when I was where you are. I would have done so much better in college and gotten so much more out of it. So just, I'm a little slow sometimes, or a lot slow. All right, I will stay here and wait and see if anyone has any other questions. Otherwise, thank you, friends. Keep up the good work. And let me know how it's going, and let me know if there's anything I can do to help. So I'll see you next week.